You already know what I'm about to say. The latest video is taking a while once again, so it's time to break the emergency glass. We're doing another Windows mod video today. Today's victim is yet another thing that was thrown into my video suggestions channel on my Discord server, and it's called Windows Avalon. This is yet another Windows Vista beta related mod, which means that of the 6 Windows mod videos that I've done on this channel so far, 3 of them have now been about Windows Vista beta mods. I promise someday there will be some variety. But this one's going to be a bit different, because while this is a mod that is trying to mimic beta builds of Windows Vista, instead of using Windows Vista or Windows 7 as its base, the creator did this using Windows 10 21H2 LTSC. So this is technically a supported thing that you can go and install on a modern PC. As always, it seems to have multiple people involved with it, but it was uploaded by Tech4090, who branded it Dumpster of Mods. What an incredible name. It's also from earlier this year, with the RTM release being uploaded on May 5th. I was prepared to get out yet another old HP Media Center laptop from the mid-2000s to install this like I did the other two, but when I actually realized what this mod was, I realized I would probably be doing a disservice to this mod and to myself by trying to install something so new on such an old computer. So instead, we're going to be using this HP Pavilion X360 M3. Bit of a mouthful there. This laptop has an Intel Core i3-7100U processor with 6GB of RAM and a mechanical hard drive. Before I installed the RTM release of this, there were 2 uploaded beta versions of this, so that seemed like a good place to start. Interestingly, because these are based on Windows 10, the ISOs are pretty big, so I had to use some old junker flash drive that isn't nearly as good as my SD card solution. But because it's based on Windows 10, it'll work just fine with the computer in UEFI mode. In keeping with the beta theme, the wallpaper of the setup has been replaced with the one used in Vista Beta 1. The setup is also largely what's used in Windows 10, but there are a couple small changes, but otherwise nothing really unexpected. Probably the most significant change is the text being centered in the installer window, which is a throwback to the Beta 1 setup for Windows Vista. Now, it seemed pretty straightforward from here. You just let the thing do what it needs to do. However, I came back to check on the computer and discovered that setup had failed. It nearly copied everything to the hard drive before throwing a generic error, and then it just booted me back out to the start page. I ended up trying it again, this time by putting the computer into legacy mode, and I also tried the Beta 2 version, because I installed both of these in a virtual machine, and they worked just fine. So I wasn't really understanding why it didn't want to install on this computer. The only real consistent thing I knew was it installed in legacy mode, so I thought, maybe? But unfortunately, it didn't work. I didn't get any footage of it, but it didn't even air out at all. It just spit me back out to the setup launcher with no error at all. So, yeah, I didn't really know what was going on here. At this point, it was time for an emergency Toshiba satellite to see if my install media was fucked, or if it was the computer that was fucked. I didn't really want to use this monstrosity for this video, but I've used it a lot before and I know it works. It just doesn't really look like it. But it too threw the same error, this time much earlier than it did on the HP computer. At this point, I was stumped. I was thinking of connecting this computer's SSD to my actual computer and trying to use a VM to install it onto there. But before I did that, I tried the RTM version of this on the computer once again. This time the setup background's a bit different, but anyway, I wasn't really concerned about that right now since I didn't even know if it would work at all. Not before giving this computer yet another bath because it was absolutely oozing its juice everywhere. Then discovering it was leaking in real time. It took a very long time to do the install, but it worked just fine. Setup copied everything correctly and rebooted. So, Yeah, I don't really have an explanation for that. I ended up just moving on to this computer for this video since, to be honest, it doesn't look like it, but it's just kind of better than an HP anyway, and it has an SSD, so this was going to be a lot faster. Because once that bit of setup is done, that's about it. It doesn't really have a hardware detection phase. For the most part, it just boots to the desktop. It's clearly been pre-configured, which I'm guessing helps a lot with the setup. And yeah, it worked fine. So I guess we're just going to skip right to the RTM release. I tried a couple more things, but it just would not install on my hardware. But anyways, with that slight interruption, now it's time to take a look at this. Probably the first thing that you would get from this is that you kind of can't really tell that you're actually looking at Windows 10 right now. The logon screen on the surface is from Windows Vista. It's even got that animation when the computer boots up. And the desktop just looks like I'm looking at Windows Vista right now. It's got a Vista-esque start menu. The taskbar flyouts are the same as they are either in Windows Vista or Windows 7. Explorer is basically how it was in Windows Vista. It's even got Aero glass. I thought maybe it would be quite obvious that this was Windows 10, but to be honest, I was kind of impressed. Now, since this is pretty much just a recreation of Windows Vista, it's got primarily Windows Vista things. But it also has some things from Windows 7, for example, like libraries, which are still in Windows 10 and 11 to this day. But you could argue actually makes sense to be here because of the whole virtual folders thing in Windows Vista Beta 1 and WinFS. In this case, they're called common places, but they're just libraries. The Games Explorer is back after being removed halfway through Windows 10's life, and otherwise a lot of the start menu shortcuts are what you would expect in Windows Vista. The control panel has also been repopulated with a lot of things in Windows Vista and in Windows 7, but not everything is perfect, of course. Parental controls, for example, doesn't work. The Windows Experience Index has returned, though this time it's using the scoring system from Windows 8, since the scores can go up to 9.9. The recovery page is kind of weird. The region applet doesn't work. Security Center has been re-added with a custom sidebar banner. Sync Center does a whole lot of nothing. Windows Card Space appears to have been pulled straight out of Windows Vista Beta 1. Windows Update does nothing. In fact, it just crashes Explorer so hard I ended up having to completely restart the computer. And of course, as you would expect for a mod like this, there are plenty of personalization options. There is a big selection of wallpapers, some of which are from Windows XP, some of which are from Windows Vista, and some of which are from both pre- and post-reset builds of Windows Vista. There's also the screensavers from Windows Vista that have been added back, the Aurora screensaver and Windows Energy. The rest of them were still in Windows 10 today, but these two in particular were removed. But now they're back, and I gotta say, it's quite something to view the screensaver on a modern computer with a GPU that isn't a potato. It really is an awesome screensaver, I'll give it that. Of course, there's also a selection of new sounds that have been added to this. Other things like the display settings are using the applets from Windows 7. The default user account picture is different. It's using the one from Windows Vista Beta, and in fact, you can't change it because there are no profile pictures at all. It also thinks that there's a password on the account for some reason. But anyways, there is of course a lot of apps and things that have been put into this as well, like the sidebar. This is a bit of a different looking sidebar than what was in Windows Vista. It's got this kind of curved thing going on. A lot of the gadgets are the same, but there are a couple of other ones from Windows Vista Beta, and this media player gadget that I have never seen before. There's also Internet Explorer, except it's not really Internet Explorer. In fact, I didn't really quite know what this was at first. It turns out this is actually a skinned version of Firefox. So this is actually a modern browser you can actually use. It's apparently Firefox version 115. There's also other Windows Vista things like Windows Mail, Windows Media Center, which has its own custom sounds. It's also got a different icon, and the background is a bit different, meant to mimic Windows Vista Beta again. Otherwise, this is the version of Media Center that was from Windows 7 and was later used in Windows 8, where this was pulled from, and can be installed on at least early versions of Windows 10. It's also got a link to Windows Ultimate Extras, but it does nothing. It has Photo Gallery, which is actually a reskinned version of Windows Live Photo Gallery. Windows Movie Maker, however, is how it was in Windows Vista. There's Windows Media Player 11. These are all just Windows Vista things for the most part. It's got Windows Live Messenger, which for whatever reason really plays strangely with the theme since I can't move the window at all. Certain things don't work at all, like Windows Collaboration. There's Windows Anti-Spyware, which is just effectively Windows Defender. Windows Calendar. Windows Contacts, which for whatever reason breaks the illusion since apparently Smart Screen doesn't work with it for some reason. Not sure why, because it's just an Explorer window. Even more accessories from Windows Vista like WordPad, Paint, Calculator, Snipping Tool. All those things were replaced with either the Windows Vista or Windows 7 versions. Windows Journal has been added back after being removed in Windows 10. And even the beta Sticky Notes program from Windows XP Tablet PC Edition is here. And of course, the Windows Vista games, which, like I said, the Games Explorer has been added back here, and all of the Windows 7 games, and even the ones from Windows Vista, have been added here as well. The only strange thing about them I notice is that they run with no animations, except for Hold M. I'm not really sure why this is the case, since this computer shouldn't have a problem with them at all, but for whatever reason, certain games just have no animations or anything at all. I also noticed while editing this video that for whatever reason, the audio is very delayed. There's a couple more subtle things like Windows Help and Support, which has been pulled from Windows Vista, but I think you're noticing a bit of a theme here. This is just Windows Vista. While there were a couple of Windows 10 elements, for the most part, you really could not tell that this was being used on top of Windows 10. But of course, there are some downsides. I already mentioned, of course, the ISO size is quite big for these at almost 8 gigabytes. And with all the visual elements and things that have been installed on here to make it look like Windows Vista, it does mean that there is quite a lot of stuff running in the background at all times. When I tested these in a virtual machine, I noticed that performance was absolutely horrible. It does run a lot better on at least the one computer I was able to get this installed on with decent hardware and an SSD, but with enough stuff open, it will get pretty laggy. This could be because of the theme that's been applied. It also seemed like occasionally I would just have to restart the computer because after a while it would just get completely bogged down. And of course there are the installation issues I experienced with this. So while it is absolutely far from perfect, I have to say, it's pretty good. Now afterwards, I did check out the Beta 1 and Beta 2 versions of this, just to see if there was anything significant. The release notes did later confirm a couple suspicions I had, mainly things being decorational and performance being, well, you get the idea. It is pretty much the same experience as the RTM release, just as you would expect for a beta release. It's still kind of work in progress, so some applications aren't modified at all. Control panel is still pretty heavily under construction. I should point out that none of these have particularly done well with scaling either, which is kind of a problem on a 4K monitor. But I'd say the Beta 2 version has had the biggest difficulty with this. The Beta 2 version also seemed to be the one that I had the most difficulty with on a VM. Oftentimes it took several attempts to get it to start up, otherwise it would just sit on a black screen and do nothing. If you have any interest in installing this, you really should just do it on a real computer though. And that is where I would end it, except 2 months ago in August, Windows Avalon Update 1 released. I was kind of hoping this would maybe somehow just be an update package or something that would work on the existing version, given how much trouble I had installing this on a computer. But no, it turned out it was an entire new version of this that had to be installed again. And I tried installing it over top the old install, but the setup was just all weird. It clearly wasn't meant to be installed this way. So I remade my flash drive once again and booted the setup off of USB. I should point out, by the way, because I have never gotten footage of this before, this is seriously how this computer deals with displaying setup when it's set in UEFI mode. But of course, while it was copying files, it too would not install. And because it's never that easy, when I look up the error, all I get is the generic same old usual stuff when you get any installation error. I'm guessing it's either because it's just so modded or it hates this computer. My sample size is incredibly small, but it just makes it extremely odd that the RTM version installed just fine, but the beta ones wouldn't and this update wouldn't. This one actually did change some stuff too. Right off the bat, the sidebar is now how it was in Windows Vista. It's not that weird curved one. The theme is a bit different. Some of the icons are different. The default wallpaper is totally different. It's even got some completely different sounds too. The last question I have is, what happens when you try and update it? A lot of the times, these heavily modified Windows versions will start to break once you try and apply any official updates to them. However, on Windows Avalon, it's a bit of a different story. The Windows Update page is pretty much non-functional, and the Settings app, while not removed, is pretty well hidden. Attempting to use the Settings app to check for updates yields no results, and I was kind of curious to see if Legacy Update would do anything, and the answer is no. But then, right as I was about to be done with this part, suddenly the Windows Update thing appeared in Control Panel. It took probably 5 minutes to load, but it eventually opened. However, this too was a dead end. A lot of the functionality is really broken. Certain pages just don't load anything, and anytime you do anything with it, it takes minutes to load. This ended up being almost half an hour. Any attempts I made to try and check for updates anyway with this yielded nothing. Even though the Windows Update service is turned on, it seems likely that there are just files or services missing from this, preventing it from being able to update. It doesn't really matter because you probably shouldn't be installing a modified version of Windows on your computer anyway, but if the README document is anything to go by, it appears that hasn't stopped people. So I'll reiterate it, I think this is a pretty interesting mod regardless. It has its flaws, but it is a pretty good recreation of Windows Vista. I suppose it's a good indication of how little Windows truly has changed since the release of Vista, but it's still pretty cool nonetheless. If you want to check it out, the links will be in the description below.